Hey guys, welcome back to First and 10, the NFL football podcast over here on Clueless Gamers. I'm one of your hosts, Pete, joined in a second by my co-host, Brian. Welcome in. It is playoff football time here on this podcast as we are now at the end of the season. It's over the 2022 season, and we are in the full swing of Super Wild Card Weekend, which I'll never get over that name, that is going on. A lot of great games have happened so far. We're kind of recording this basically at the end of the wild card weekend. There is still one game left to be played as of this recording, which is the Bucks Cowboys, which takes place on Monday night. This was just a time that worked for Brian and I, so we're going to kind of preview that game, and we're also going to recap some of the wild card games that have all the rest of the wild card games that have gone on this weekend. With all that being said, Brian, I welcome you in. How are you, man? What's going on? Have you enjoyed this Super Wild Card weekend?
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of good football over the weekend, some surprising results. I think some of the games we thought were going to be complete blowouts and the underdogs kind of hung in for a
Yeah.
while. It was really kind of an underdog day, not as far as winning outright, but covering the number. We'll get into some of the specifics, but Miami's performance to hang in there with Buffalo, and then obviously Baltimore was in the game with Cincinnati for quite a while. Bengals came out on top, but a lot to get into, a lot of kind of crazy things that went down, crazy comeback on Saturday night, so looking forward to getting into all of it.
Yeah, it was a great weekend. I think you said it best is that games that we thought, particularly that took place with the seven seeds, that we thought would not be great. And I understand there's the whole stat that since this has been introduced now, I think it's the second season of having the expanded playoffs, no seven seed has won a single game. I get that. But this season, we could say that these games were way more competitive than, let's say, like Chiefs Steelers was last year. We could see a lot more of the kind of divisional matchups ended up being good games, at least for a half, if not the entire game. Let's jump into the first games that took place on Saturday, and that kicked off with the Niners hosting the Seattle Seahawks. It was a very aforementioned there, a 2 versus a 7 seed, the third time in these two teams meeting. San Francisco beating Seattle both times in the regular season. And Bry, this was a game, a classic game that we saw a couple times this weekend of two halves. It was a tale of two
Yeah.
halves. Seattle looked really great in the first half, but the broadcast kept saying it over and over, and we all knew it as fans watching, is that Seattle has to play a perfect game if they wanted to pull this upset. Never mind just stay in the game, and they were not able to sustain the success that they had in the first half, in the second half, and we saw kind of the Niners just run away with it. Brian, before I give some of my thoughts on the game, what was kind of your take on when you were watching it and kind of how it played out for the rookie Brock Purdy in his first playoff start, continuing this role that he's on?
Yeah, I think the people who thought Seattle would either hang in the game or even by some crazy chance win it would have said, chalked it up to the inexperience of Brock Purdy and, what he would do in his first playoff start. And I think there were some early jitters. In that
For
first
sure.
quarter, there were some throws that were way off the mark, and you're like, oh boy, what's going on with the 49ers here? But he really put it together. In the second half, the entire team had just a dominating performance despite going into the half down by a point. And I think there were some Niner fans that were a little nervous after DK Metcalf is strolling into the end zone on that 50-yard
Yeah.
touchdown pass. Perfectly thrown ball from Geno Smith. And it was like, well, maybe the Seahawks are going to hang in. But I think in the second half, the 49ers just showed their might and showed why they are maybe the most dangerous team in this playoff because of the talent on both sides of the ball. Christian McCaffrey, I just think, is the ultimate difference maker. Go along with Debo Samuel. He really made the game breaking play in this game, the
Yeah.
catch and run, where he makes the catch on a short crossing route and just takes it the distance. And it's those kind of plays that make the 49ers so dangerous. So, I just think the second half, Seattle ran out of answers. 49ers kind of flexed their muscles and it wound up being a runaway game.
Yeah, I think that, the issue with Seattle is in the first half, they're everything's going their way. They don't have any penalties committed towards them, and they're flying on all cylinders. They get a couple broken coverages and just some great play calls. As you mentioned on the Metcalf touchdown, and you came out and you kind of felt it. If you've watched a lot of Niner games this season, you felt the momentum could shift at any second. They just needed a little bit of a break. And really, uncharacteristically, at the end of the first half, you have the penalty committed, you had the personal foul against Geno Smith as he goes to slide, and that ultimately leads to Seattle even having a chance at, I think, a 56-yard field goal it was, and that's what ultimately lets them take the lead of 17-16. And it seems like, the Niners are not playing buttoned up, and I think Kyle Shanahan really probably ripped into them in the locker room there going into the second half of, like, this is a team that we should beat. We understand the divisional opponent, but they don't have the talent that we have, and you're committing stupid penalties and letting them stay in this game. Just let this other team beat themselves. They're not going to be as good as you, and I think that's what they had, that mentality, because Brock Purdy definitely had the jitters in the first half. I mean, you saw it. He was downright bad. I mean, he was missing throws. He was under 50% completion percentage in the first half. Like, you could see that he was very much a rookie, and he wasn't getting put in the great situations. The run game wasn't flowing as best as you wanted to, and everything clicked the right way there in the second half. And really, you saw from minute to minute as they were on those drives, his confidence was growing and growing. His passing, he was going more and more from the line of scrimmage of deeper and deeper passes. And they really, once that team, as you mentioned, has things flowing, you have McCaffrey, you have Debo, you have Kittle, you have Ayuk. I mean, there's just an onslaught of guys that are there, skill position guys, that can just come at you. And even, it's just, even that offensive line, I mean, with Williams and everybody, and they have such strength, they have such size, they have such ability just to push the pocket and move forward, and they're very dangerous. They're a scary team. We know what that defense is. I mean, that goes without saying what Nick Bosa and those boys can do. Fred Warner, they're incredible. But this was just a classic case of, hey, division opponents meeting again, but a way more talented team kind of righted the ship a little bit, got the rookie QB settled down, and it was a runaway there in the second half. I mean, Seattle scores a late garbage time touchdown, but for the most part, Seattle didn't score the entire second half until very, very late.
Yeah, and I just want to give some extra credit to Brock Purdy, because I think there's this narrative out there that he's in just an incredible situation, which he is, and that any quarterback can go in there with those weapons and that offensive line, the team that he has around him, and be successful. But that's not the case. You're taking a guy who was the last pick of the draft. He's showing some skills here. You can't just throw anybody into that situation and have them consistently be winning games in the playoffs where the pressure is ratcheted up. This guy deserves a lot of credit. He clearly has the demeanor, he has the talent to play in this league, and just might be the guy going forward in the team that drafted Trey Lance high, and who knows what the future holds for him.
Yeah.
Jimmy Garoppolo then gets hurt, and he's taken this opportunity and run with it, and might just be the franchise guy going forward.
I definitely want to push back on you a little bit there, just because I feel like we have seen multiple different style QBs be successful in this offense, and I do think these QBs can be sometimes a little bit of a product or an afterthought of Kyle Shanahan's run game and kind of his offense. However, the more and more we see Brock Purdy grow, we're seeing more and more that there is some talent here. There is some athleticism here. I mean, we saw in that one touchdown he had to Mitchell, which I think was the go-ahead touchdown. He kind of does that spin around on the sack. He throws out, and he just finds him open in the flat there. So this is becoming a good situation for the Niners, but still, it's going to be a tough one that if they go deeper and deeper into these playoffs, what do you do with Trey Lance? I mean, Jimmy, he's out the door, right? That's not a problem anymore after he got hurt. That's done. But, like, Trey Lance, you spent multiple first-round picks to draft him. Like, that might become an issue if Brock Purdy takes this team to the NFC Championship, takes this team to the Super Bowl, maybe wins the Super Bowl. You can't put Trey Lance back in there. And now you have an issue where I guess you're looking to trade him. I mean, that's something we'll talk about more in the offseason as these playoffs progress. But I like the flexing of the muscles here of the Niners. They're the most scary team by far in the NFC. Definitely one of the more consistent teams that are going into these playoffs. I mean, we'll talk in a second about some of these so-called juggernauts and people like the Buffalo Bills not playing their best football right now. The Niners are the exact opposite. I believe this is winners of, 10 or 11 in a row now, dating back to the regular season. They got the hottest streak in football. They are going to be a sledgehammer for the rest of the NFC. Brian, going to the other game on Saturday, which is going to be a game that people talk about for a long, long time because it was the third largest comeback in playoff history. I'm talking about, of course, the LA Chargers. They go down to Duval County. They are in Jacksonville, and they're up at one point, 27-0. And the Chargers are cruising. They've gotten 5 turnovers. I will say, as we discuss more of this game, you would think they would have gotten more points off of the turnovers they had, given the field position they have. But regardless, it was 27-0. Everything was looking good. And then what happened, Bri? The wheels just kind of started falling off a little bit. Nothing huge happened. The Chargers didn't commit any turnovers to let Jacksonville back in the game. They just could not gain first downs, and ultimately Jacksonville leads the 3rd largest comeback, as I said, in NFL playoff history. Bri, you're watching this game on Saturday night take place. We have a saying, as many people do on the internet here, the Chargers are gonna charger, and this has to be the most ultimate one that we've seen in at least a number of years. I mean, what are you thinking when you watch this?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like this is a franchise that just finds ways to lose, almost invents ways to lose, and no bigger example than this. I mean, you cannot have that kind of lead, be the first team ever to be +5 in the turnover differential and lose a playoff game. I mean, it's just beyond inexplicable, and it's the whole. I know people want to point to the head coach, and he deserves a lot of blame. But
For
to
sure.
me, Justin Herbert is not blameless either.
Absolutely.
And I know he didn't have Mike Williams in this game, and that takes away one of their big weapons. But they've got to make more. They've got to generate more offense in the second half. They had too many quick drives, and Jacksonville capitalized on all their chances. But I go back to the score before halftime when they're down 27-0 to make it 27-7. I thought that was a huge play because the momentum going into the half, just to have points on the board, just gives you a different feeling. Even though you're still down by 20 at that point, I still felt like, okay, the Jags need to score here, and when they did, I felt there was a decent chance just because of the Chargers' history of falling apart. And Jacksonville, we knew would come in. They were hot. You know, their offense was in gear. Trevor Lawrence was playing well. So to me, it was a big surprise that they fell behind like they did, and just turnover after turnover. I mean, you talk about a nightmare performance. When you go to sleep at night, that's like your worst nightmare, having a playoff game where you throw 4 interceptions in a half of football. But I mean, for them to come back, that says a lot about Trevor Lawrence and the kind of player he can be going forward. And I think there's a tremendous amount of confidence now, both in him and in Doug Peterson coaching this team. That was a tremendous effort by Jacksonville. A lot of kind of weird things that went on with the penalty with Joey Bosa and going for the 2-point conversion that holds over the goal line. But just a great comeback by Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, you could see why this guy was taken first overall in the draft, right? I mean, you had, as you said, as bad of a half as you could have. Bad as a first quarter. I mean, you throw 3 picks there in that first quarter. You know, Asante Samuel Jr. is making a fool out of you. He's throwing up 3 picks. He's got all this stuff going on. He's throwing up the fingers. Then you just get unlucky on the punt return where it bounces off a guy's helmet, you know, when it's trying to get to Agnew, and that leads the ball for the Chargers to get the ball at the 6-yard line. You hold them, which is something we'll talk in a second about the Chargers. You hold them to a field goal there, and it just seems like everything that could go wrong was going wrong for Jacksonville. And that touchdown to Evan Ingram there at the end of the first half, that was huge. I mean, because, and I said it at that moment when I'm watching the game, I said, that is something as Doug Peterson, you could go into the locker room and go, hey guys, we can hang our hats on that. Look, we scored. We're on the board. You know, the shutout's over. We played as bad as we could have ever done. You ever imagined that first half? We can only go up from here. We can only go up from here. And I think that had to be the mentality that he, you know, tell his team, one play at a time, one drive at a time. Just make the stops you need to make. We'll score. We'll be productive. We'll play. He said, I think in the one of the halftime interviews, he said, we're going to not get away from our game. We're going to play our game. So they weren't going to lead this speed-up offense. Oh, we're only pass. They were going to run it. They were going to pass it. They were going to do exactly their normal offense. They had plenty of time. And when the Chargers are going 3 and out, time after time after time, you can do those things. You know, it's I've never watched a game before where a comeback has been this large and the other team that was letting the comeback happen to them didn't have any turnovers. Like, they didn't let Jacksonville back in the game. They threw a pick 6. They had a fumble on the goal line. They just could not gain first downs, and they're punting it away and punting away, and Jacksonville methodically, long drives, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 9 minutes. They come down the field and they're scoring, they're playing their game, and you felt like every time, I'm sure you felt this way as well, every time Jacksonville scored a touchdown and it was 27-14, uh-oh, 27-21, uh-oh, like you could feel the momentum, and just like you felt the Chargers get tighter and tighter, like the screws got tighter on their offense, and ultimately it contributed to that collapse that they had in the second half.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, I don't know. We talked a lot about the Chargers throughout the year and where they go from here. Do they make a head coaching change? I'm not so sure that that's the answer because they've been juggling through a lot of head coaches in recent years, from the Anthony Lynn's of the world and Mike McCoy and Norv Turner. It's the same story regardless of who it is. So, I mean, you got an extremely talented quarterback. You got good players on both sides of the ball. It's just a matter of putting it all together, and they just haven't been able to do it.
I mean, if I'm them, I don't think the Spanos family that owns the Chargers is going to do this. I don't think they're going to fire Brandon Staley. But if I'm them, I go out and I pay the $20 million for Sean Payton. I do it. There's the reports that this is where he wants to be. He wants to be in LA. Now that the Rams job is closed up with McVay returning, this feels like you have a young franchise quarterback. You have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. We just need better coaching to kind of gain it out of these guys. We need that upper level of coaching. And Brandon Staley, he's a very talented guy. I think he's a really good defensive coordinator. I don't know if he's cut out to be head coach, at least at this point in his career, because they don't have an identity. There's questionable decisions of how they use their challenges, their timeouts. They go for it on fourth down. Now they never go for it on fourth down. I mean, none of it makes any sense. And as you said at the top of this conversation, Justin Herbert deserves just as much blame. Staley is getting so much blame, and I feel like Herbert is getting nothing. Herbert consistently went out there with that offense that still has talent. I understand they lost Mike Williams, and then they had DeAndre Carter get banged up during the game, but there's still talent there, and they could still run that ball, and they just didn't do anything. Right. Like I'm not saying that you can beat with the injuries you had, go to Kansas City, go to the Buffalo Bills, or even the Bengals. But you got to beat the Jags when you're up 27-0. I mean, that you have to make a couple plays there. They miss a 40-yard kick. I mean, it was just the Chargers being the Chargers on full display, and credit to Doug Peterson and that offense just riding the ship, and that defense made a whole bunch of plays too. Now, they're in for a tall task there going up to Kansas City. We'll talk more in the next podcast about what we think of those games going forward, but to get that first win and to kind of get all the pressure off your back there, especially how bad you started, you got to be impressed. And there's going to be a lot of soul searching and conversations, I think, for the Chargers this offseason. I'm just worried they're going to be like the Chargers, and they're not going to make the move that needs to be done, and they're going to roll this same group out here next year, and it's just going to be more of the same, because I have no reason to believe otherwise.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say on the Chargers, like when you have the big lead that you do, you go out in the second half and you try to use some clock with the running game. You got a terrific running back, and Austin Eckler, he scored 2 touchdowns in this game, but a very modest rushing total, only 30-something yards. You can't have that kind of total. You got to go to the running game more often. He didn't really have that many carries in this game, and he's a guy who can be a factor both running and passing. I just think, they got away from it in a situation where they should have relied on it, and, it cost them.
Absolutely. And we mentioned it briefly, but we didn't outright say it. Staley also deserves a lot of the blame as well, given what he did last week, right? He plays his starters against Denver in a meaningless game. Right. They can't change their seed, and that allows Bosa to get nicked up. He thankfully played in this game, and it ultimately led to Mike Williams not playing. He gets a small fracture in his back. He was going to miss maybe 2 to 3 weeks. They would basically have to get to the Super Bowl for him to be available, and they don't even get out of the wild card round. So he definitely deserves a lot of the blame there as well for his decisions and what he was thinking. He made a weird excuse of like, oh, you only have 48 guys to choose from or something like that. It's like, well, the Giants put out third stringers when they played against the Eagles. I think it's totally possible. Teams do it all the time. So he deserves a lot of blame. So does Herbert. And another talented year of a Chargers team being uber talented, having a franchise level quarterback, one that I think has the ability to reach even above a Phillip Rivers and get on that level of maybe a Dan Fouts in franchise history. And they're just wasting his years as per usual of the Chargers.
Yeah.
So, Brian, we'll go over to the Sunday games. It was a triple header on the Sunday games. And we kick off with Miami Buffalo, which I actually thought would be, and I think most people thought, would be the biggest blowout of the weekend because you got
Yes.
third stringer Skylar Thompson. He's throwing for about 110 yards a game. He's not really doing much. He's got a little bit of athleticism, but he's not like he's any crazy runner. Miami's beat up all over the place. And Buffalo, who under the radar has not played well in the last couple months of the season. I mean, they've scrapped some wins together. They have a million turnovers. Josh Allen led the league in red zone interceptions. We saw the turnover bug get to them in this game, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
They have not played great, but still the disparity between the talent of these two teams, especially the quarterback position in this game with Tua out, with Teddy Bridgewater out, you thought this would just be a walkover. And you know what, Bri? Credit to the Miami Dolphins and Coach McDaniels. They're having a third stringer in here. They split the season series. They're playing this team for the third time in Buffalo with, of course, all the emotion that's going on, not only for the love of that team, but everything that's gone around with DeMar Hamlin. Everyone's kind of behind Buffalo. And to go in there and only lose by 3 and have a chance there at the end to put up that kind of performance where they don't convert a fourth down, I thought was incredibly impressive. Just to speak on the Miami part first, I mean, what was your takeaway when you were watching the 34-31 win by the Bills?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it really was a wild game with a lot of twists and turns, and looked early on like it was going to follow the script and be a Buffalo blowout because it was so close to being 21-0 in like the first quarter. Dawson Knox could have hung on to what would have been his second touchdown,
Yeah.
but that came off the board. They settled for a field goal. They're up 17-0 and looked like they were in complete cruise control. But then the turnovers started, and that allowed Miami some life, and they took advantage. I mean, I would not have expected they would have the lead at any point in this game, and they did on a couple different occasions. Their defense got after Josh Allen. I think they sacked him 7 times. They got a couple interceptions.
Yeah.
They got the strip sack recovered for a touchdown in the second half to take the lead. So they were very much in this game. And I think if not for some porous play from the wide receivers. I mean,
Yes.
there was drop after drop in this game from guys who had huge years. We know about this duo of receivers with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle,
Yep.
but Waddle in particular,
He had a rough
I mean,
day.
had a
Yeah.
very rough. I think it was like the first play from scrimmage. Skylar Thompson airs it out, has him downfield, just flat drops the ball. It would have been a huge play to start the game,
Yep.
and he had multiple drops after that. So I think that was a big factor for Miami. I mean, you credit them for hanging in, and Thompson, I think, played a lot better than anyone could have thought. The numbers don't show how
They don't
well
wow
he played.
you.
The complete,
Yeah.
yeah, no, they don't wow you. The completion percentage was terrible, but he had a lot of drops. He could have had a lot better of a game, but in the end, the Bills, as we know, are the more talented team, and Josh Allen, even with the turnovers, made enough big plays. Diggs had a huge first half, kind of fell off in the second half, didn't seem to get too many targets, but they just have so many weapons that if they turn the ball over, they're capable of blowing anybody out. It's the turnovers that hold this team back, and we'll see if that's going to be the case going forward.
I mean, this is the stats I want to give you, Bri, right? So about a little over about 4.5 minutes, Buffalo controlled it more in Miami. Okay, no big deal there. Skylar Thompson, as you mentioned, 40% completion percentage on day. Was that, aided of how poor it was because of some drops? Absolutely. But it's not like he was lighting up the yard here, okay? Buffalo was 9 for 16 on third down compared to 4 for 16 for Miami. A huge discrepancy there. Okay, they rushed more. They passed more. Had almost double the total amount of yards. But what's the difference here, Bri? 2 picks again for Buffalo. They had 4 fumbles. They were thankful to only lose 1, which ended up being ultimately that defensive touchdown that you mentioned there. This was not a good game from Buffalo, and I'm going to take more of the side that, you talked more about being impressed by Miami. I said that at the top. This is more an indictment on the Buffalo Bills. This is not a good performance, okay? And they are lucky. They are lucky that they won this game, and I'd be very, very scared of playing the Bengals. And the only thing is, and we'll talk about that on the next podcast, they might catch a break because the Bengals got even more injured against the Baltimore Ravens. So they might catch another break in these playoffs. But if you're telling me even if they get past that and they play at Kansas City, I don't have any hope in them. I don't have any faith the way they've been playing the last 2 months of the year. This has been sloppy football. They cannot run the ball. They commit penalties. You let up 7 sacks. I've never looked at Miami's defensive line. I go, oh, they're solid. I've never looked at them and
Yeah.
go, oh, you know what? They're the purple people eaters of the Vikings in the 60s, or or the Steelers defense of the 70s. 7 sacks. You're lucky that you got 3 of those fumbles back, that they weren't turned over. It's not good enough. Those 2 picks by Allen, you're up 17-0, and then he kind of lets Miami right back into the game and opens the door there. I just have a lot of questionable decisions about how he's playing, and I think other people have brought it up, and I think it's worth mentioning. It's the Brian Daboll effect. We saw what he's doing with the Giants. We'll talk about them in a second. I think they miss him. I think you could clearly see that all the stuff that he cleaned up in Josh Allen's game, it's like slowly but surely that old Josh Allen that used to be there before he kind of hit that growth spurt that Daboll took him on, those pieces are starting to come back. Those old habits are starting to come back. And even though he's still passing way better completion percentage than he did when he first came into the league, these turnovers are becoming a massive problem. And it's not always just, a tipped ball. It's decision making. It's wondering, what are you doing? Like, even, he goes to air it out to John Brown there, but you're up 17-0. Like, I just didn't think, or maybe it was 17-3 at that point. I didn't think there was a need to throw just a kind of hapless ball in the air to have it easily picked off and change the momentum of the game. And I wonder about this Buffalo team going forward. As situationally, I didn't like some of the things that McDermott called. He called, I think, 2 times during the second half, a timeout where it would have benefited his team if he let the play run, but he called a timeout to stop it there. And I understand he didn't know what was going to happen, but there's just a lot of questionable time management there and decision-making that I don't like. And I think McDaniels went in there again, very much like he did in Buffalo in the season where they also lost the Dolphins. And I thought McDaniels, he outcoached him. I think the only thing that I will criticize McDaniels on is it's 3rd and 19. It's near your own end zone inside the 10-yard line. Run the ball. Run a screen pass. Just punt the ball away. There was no need for Skylar Thompson to, you call him to throw a go route on the sideline over there. It gets picked off, and then ultimately it leads to a Buffalo touchdown, changes the entire momentum of the game, where Buffalo is trailing, and they're struggling, and their offense hasn't done anything, and now you gave them a short field to kind of get the momentum, and then they never look back. So that's the only thing I would criticize McDaniels on. But overall, you have to be impressed what Miami did. There's a report that they're going to bring back Tua for next season. We could talk about that more in the offseason if that's the way to go. But I think if Tua was playing this game, Bri, I think they win yesterday.
Yeah, I've heard that narrative out there. I'm not so sure about that, just because down the stretch, I don't think he was playing his best football either. But I think I have a little bit less concerns about the Bills going forward than you. I mean, I am concerned about the turnovers, but I think you also have to look at the fact that Allen did make a lot of big plays in this game. I
Yeah.
mean, there were a lot of throws where it's like, there's not many guys who can make this throw. Or
Of
he's
course, I
hitting
understand.
digs on just a beautiful ball. Gabe Davis, they had a couple big plays where the receivers kind of lost it going to the ground that would have been big plays too. So I just think this guy has all the talent in the world. Yes, he's got to be careful about turning the ball over, but I don't really have as much question about him being able to do the job. And I will also say for Mike McDaniel, the end of the game there was not a great look on him when they have the 4th and 1 and they get
Yeah.
the delay of game in a
Yeah.
spot where you absolutely cannot have a delay of game. And then on the 4th and 6, they can't capitalize, and that's the game. So. It was really an interesting game, and certainly Miami battled a lot more than anyone could have thought. But in the end, the Bills to me are still very dangerous.
That seemed like a situation there that with McDaniels thought they had already got the first down, I saw, and that so he was preparing a different play, didn't know it was still 4th and 1, and that ultimately is what led to kind of the delay game. I mean, you could see they were struggling with the rookie QB there. They were very late on the play clock on a lot of plays, had to call a couple timeouts there in the second half to even avoid the delay game that would have led to penalties. They were struggling to get some of the plays in, and that's just kind of the bumps you're going to have having a rookie QB there on the road in a playoff game. All right, Bryce, so we go over to the second game that took place here on Sunday, and it was kind of a game here in the local area that was the biggest game of the weekend. It was the Minnesota Vikings hosting the New York Giants. We're in the tri-state area, so this was the huge game here that was going on this weekend. And ultimately, the Vikings fall 31-24 at home, the number 3 seed. Does a classic Minnesota and collapses again in the playoffs. Doesn't even get one win here at home. And the Giants, with a team that you would probably argue on the surface level, I would say, from a talent on paper perspective, is worse than the Minnesota Vikings. But it all comes down to, of course, as we know, not on paper, but on the field. And this team played with more grit, more heart, and they made more smart decisions in clutch moments. And that starts with the difference between these two QBs in this game and Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins. Daniel Jones was fantastic in this game, running, throwing. They really look like they took the cuffs off of him and fully unleashed him to kind of his abilities that keep growing and growing week to week. This last 5 or 6 weeks for him has been absolutely fantastic. Bri, you're watching this game, you're watching Minnesota lose another playoff game, really one where they didn't have too much control throughout the entire game. It's not that like they were leading by a big margin at any point. You always felt like the Giants were there to just squash out any comeback Minnesota was having. What were you thinking when you were watching this?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is the Vikings clearly showed themselves to be the frauds that many people thought
Yep.
they were. Got off to such a good start this season and riding high in that game in Buffalo, but then just too many weird games down the stretch where they were getting questioned about just how good they were, and well, we saw it on display. And look, the Giants deserve a ton of credit. You mentioned the play of the quarterback. It was probably the best game of his career.
Yeah.
I mean, everything he
It was
was able to
excellent.
do, passing, running, just the offense executing full well. They didn't turn the ball over. They made big plays. They got Barkley involved. They used this ragtag group of receivers. This Hodgins has really stepped up and
I
been
know.
a great factor in the offense. And look, the Giants' offense was clicking on all cylinders, but I think you also have to look at the other side. The Vikings' defense was just
It's
abysmal. I
porous.
mean, how many times did we see, like, look, this Giants' offense is not exactly, the greatest show on turf. And you had receivers running free in the
Absolutely.
secondary, guys falling down. I mean, Slayton's just running for big plays, and look, like I said, credit the Giants offense, but at some point, you got to make some kind of a play on defense, and they just had no answers. I mean, when you start a playoff game and you go right down the field with ease and score to go up 7-0 and you're at home, you think, oh, this is a good start. We're ready for this game. And right after that, the Giants get the ball and go down the field with no resistance
Nope.
whatsoever. And you just knew from that point that the Giants were going to have no problem moving the football, that they would be in this game, that they would really have control of it for most of the way. And they got themselves a great win. I mean, credit the quarterback, credit the coach. We've given him praise all season, deservedly so. I mean, he's done a remarkable job turning around this franchise from the absolute doldrums. You're a Giant fan right now. You're riding high. And I think almost even more so because it's more fun having a year like this where nobody believed in you going into the season and you had kind of this magic carpet ride getting here. And now this is fun. You're in the playoffs with a team that nobody thinks is going to do anything, and they're winning games and doing it in good fashion. So I think all the way around, you have to love what you see from the Giants' perspective.
No, you absolutely do. I mean, it feels like Brian Daboll should be and will be coach of the year. I mean, what he's done of taking this team that hadn't been in the playoffs since 2016 and they were one and done, the famous boat game, when that happened that year, to get a playoff win here, to even get into the playoffs of all the injuries they've had and just a lack of talent. You've had Kenny Galladay in the doghouse all year, and he's kind of starting to play a little bit here. He had a couple good run blocks yesterday. There's there's something here with this coaching staff, and we've talked about in the last few weeks, and really since this podcast has started, is coaching matters. It absolutely matters. It matters even more at the NFL level than it does really in any other sport, basketball, baseball. It matters so much here. And if you could have a consistent head coach that can really reach guys, that can, especially if he's a play call, can design plays and put guys in the right positions to succeed, it doesn't matter if there's a discrepancy in talent all the time. You can get wins. Now, yes, talent is still what wins in this league, right? Are the Giants the upper echelon here of the league? No. Are they going to go on probably some magical run where they win the Super Bowl this year? No. But to do this in your first year, you can't say enough about it. And you see Hodgins posting about his ankle after the game, what it looked like before the game. It's all swelled up and messed up, and he still went out there and he's catching for 105 yards on the day. Richie James has been a nice find for them. Slayton, they've really put it together here, and Barkley has had really, I feel like, his first coming out year since he's joined the league. I know he's had some good games and a year or so here and there, but this feels like an all put together year that he finally had, where he was basically injury free, knock on wood, and he was able to really do what he was drafted at the number 2 overall position. And that offensive line is still figuring things out. You saw Evan Neal get beat a couple times yesterday, but they keep consistently coming back to these guys. And I thought the showcase of Brian Daboll was not even on the field, but it was on the sideline, right? You have that big 3rd and 15 play that ends up happening. Slayton drops it. Basically could have ended the game, right? And it gave the Vikings a chance to go. And for Daboll to walk over to him, and he literally lifted his chin, and you could see he's talking to him about, listen, keep your head up. We're going to come back to you. You're one of the guys on the team. You imagine he said, this is something where don't get down on this. It happens. You're human. I imagine it's something along those lines that he was saying, and that is the epitome of a good leader, a good coach, and a good person. And I really like that you could see that not only happen on the sidelines, but you could understand why this team rallies around him the way they do. It's just, it's a pleasure to watch the New York Giants.
Yeah, and there was a feeling out there that when they made the hire, and it was like, well, he had success in Buffalo. He was working with a great quarterback in Josh Allen, who, by the way, he may be a lot better, as we pointed out earlier today. It's like, well, Daniel Jones doesn't have the talent level that Josh Allen does. Well, no, he doesn't. But he has gotten Daniel Jones to be the best version of himself. Just as he got Josh Allen to be the best version of himself, he's doing the same with the Giants. It's a little bit of a different skill set, but it just shows how good coaching works in different places. And yeah, he's done a remarkable job. And the other thing I want to point out is the defensive game plan that they had to slow down Justin Jefferson, who we know is an all-world player, holding him under 50 yards receiving. They basically were like, we'll let somebody else beat us. And the guy was TJ Hawkinson, the tight end, who had well over 100 yards. But that's all fine. They slowed down the biggest weapon. I thought that was huge.
No, I completely agree. I understand that wide receivers are your link to the play of the quarterback. That is obvious. But it has been a little bit of a problem here at the end of the season, and we've seen this in these big games, that Justin Jefferson, for all the talent that he has, and he's one of the best receivers in football, he lets a lot of these games happen to him where he kind of disappears off the map when the primetime games and the lights are brightest. You don't want to be compared to Kirk Cousins in that way. Of when the lights are brightest, you're not playing your best football, and that has become an issue for Minnesota. I also think it's weird anytime I watch a Vikings game where consistently they don't feed Dalvin Cook, and he's one of the best running backs in the league. They paid him all this money, but they never give him the ball in the ways that he should be involved. I always think that's a very weird situation. And then this defense has been porous all year. I mean, we haven't talked much about it here on this podcast, but they've been bottom league in rushing, in passing. I think they were 31st in passing. They have not played well this season. That is definitely something that they're going to have to improve, because I don't think they're going to move on from Kirk Cousins. I mean, where are you going to go? You're not high enough that you're going to draft a generational talent. There's really no one on the market that's going to be better than he is. So where are you going to go? You're going to end up keeping him, and the only way then to prop him up and to go farther in the playoffs is you have to improve the talent around him, and that starts with that defense. That defense is really, really bad. There's a couple pieces there, like a Zadarius Smith or a Hunter, but other than that, they have to improve there significantly. And I like what Kevin O'Connell did in his first year with Minnesota. I think he deserves props. He gets them to 12 wins. I think that's a big feat in itself. It was 12 or 13 wins. I think it was 12. But to get them to where they were, that's impressive. You win a division title, great. Now what's the next step here? And I need to see more out of the Minnesota Vikings as they go forward. But ultimately, hats off to the Giants. Probably the best game Daniel Jones has played. And now going against Philadelphia next week, where they've kind of gotten handled twice, one of them just with the Giants playing backups. What happens? I think it all depends on Jalen Hurts' kind of shoulder, how healthy he is, and we'll break down that game more later this week in another podcast. Bri, the final game of the weekend was last night, Sunday night. It was a classic AFC North matchup between the Baltimore Ravens traveling to Cincinnati. Cincinnati hosting another playoff game here in the wild card round, much like they did last year, except last time it was the Las Vegas Raiders. And this time, just like last time, it came really down to the end of the game where a couple plays went the Bengals' way. They made some defensive plays, and that's what led to the win. Tyler Huntley, he's the big story. He started in this game. Lamar did not even travel with the team. He put a thing out on Twitter where he addressed this situation, which I thought was good from a PR perspective of explaining, like, I still have some swelling in my knee. It's not responded the way to treatment. I wish I could be out there. I think we'll still have a chance. Weird, though, if you're going to be the franchise quarterback, you don't travel with the team for a playoff game. Not a great look there. There's definitely a lot of animosity going on right now. That's a situation we can break down more another day. That's not good what's going on there. But Tyler Huntley played pretty well. And this game ultimately comes down to a 14-point swing, Bri. It comes down late in the second half. You have Huntley about to send the Ravens up 24-17. He just had an incredible 30-yard plus run doing his best Lamar Jackson. He played a solid game, and for some reason, they call a QB sneak. They're not at the 1 yard line or the 6-inch line. They're pretty far out. They're like 3 or so yards out. And they go and call a QB sneak where instead of going low, they have Huntley go high. And the broadcasters pointed out, you can't have your QB go high from that distance and also have the running backs push him from behind, because it will lead to a situation where he kind of gets caught in no man's land. He gets held up and the ball gets punched out the way it does. Hubbard finds it and runs it 98 yards, which was tied for the longest fumble return in NFL playoff history. That was the game. That was the game-winning touchdown right there. Cincinnati's offense didn't score a single point after that. So, Bri, you're watching this game, a classic battle, a beat-up battle. The Bengals really got hurt in this game. They get the win, but man, did they suffer some injuries. What was your takeaway here, this 24-17 win by the Bengals?
Yeah, the offensive line's going to be a major concern for Cincinnati. It wasn't in the game last night, and now, even more injuries there. I mean, I think they've got like 3 starters hurt from their usual groups, so clearly it's a problem. The Ravens had a great game plan, I thought, coming in, because, they knew they weren't going to win a shootout kind of game, and so they kind of made it a muddled kind of a game, and that was the only style that they were going to be able to win. So they didn't allow Cincinnati and these great receivers to have big play after big play. Chase had a lot of catches, but he didn't have any explosive plays. They really did a good job holding down the big weapons, and then offensively, I think they did far better than you could have thought going in. You mentioned the performance of Huntley. He was good enough to win, with running and throwing. He made a beautiful long touchdown pass to Demarcus Robinson. This has been a team that has struggled with its wide receivers making plays. That was a big play. And you mentioned they're on the verge of going in for a go-ahead score, and you get that kind of a play. I mean, that's just a momentum swing for the century. When you're, like you said, it's a 14-point swing, but there's no way you can leave the ball exposed like that when you're not at the goal line and just have it get smacked out and Hubbard take it the distance, and kind of the extra story of him being a Cincinnati growing up that had to make it more special for him. And by the way, it was a great call by Mike Tirico on that play. But I really felt like Cincinnati survived. It was by far not their best performance. I think they're going to have to be a lot better offensively to beat a team like Buffalo. The restrictions of the Ravens offense, and obviously the key miscue there late doomed them.
Yeah, the Ravens played as well as they could. I mean, there was some clock management issues that Harbaugh addressed after the game, where they asked him, you had a first down by Dobbins on a little, pass over the middle. It was a little over a minute to go. Why didn't you call a timeout there? They had 2 timeouts, and he said, they were trying to save it for in the red zone, and then they ultimately, had some incompletions. I kind of just disagree with it. I understand he's an NFL head coach. I'm a nobody here from my bedroom, but I just think that's a poor decision. Of you have a backup QB there. You know that it would be better to have him come to the sideline to call the correct plays. You're undermanned what is going on. Do not have him running a 1-minute offense in the middle of the field, and it took him almost 30 seconds to get the next play started, which ended up being nothing. They had the run to the outside that they thought, I think it was with Hill, then it gets called back from a holding penalty, and now you're set all the way back, and you're basically throwing it to the end zone. And crazily enough, they almost get a tip pass that ends up tying the
Yeah.
game there. They're inches away. Their wide receiver
Yep.
right there in the end zone. He had his hands on it. He was just
Yep.
like a couple, maybe 3 or 4 inches away from catching a game-tying touchdown. I think the Bengals, they're the story here. They haven't played well in this game. Remember, Kappa was injured coming into this game, their guard. They've lost Lyle Collins for the year. They had more injuries in this game here. I just think this is becoming a growing problem with the Bengals, where it feels like everything that they improved on this season, they're back to the Bengals of last playoffs. Burrow sacked another 4 times here, was pressured all night.
Yep.
I would watch out for what happens. I know Buffalo is not, some sack masters over there, but with Milano and those guys, I'd be careful of going into Buffalo and how that's going to take place. And that can ultimately end up dooming the Bengals here. But an ugly game, Burrow plays his worst football against this Ravens defense statistically since he's come into the league. They are just very hard on their opponents, especially here on Joe Burrow. And they played really well. And if the right play is called, because J.K. Dobbins talked before the game that, he was the guy, they should be giving him the ball. And
Right.
then he kind of says, he doesn't mince words after that, well, why didn't he get the ball in that play that Huntley went to sneak it? That should have been a play for him. I don't disagree. Now, saying those things publicly, that could cause some problems within your team. But otherwise, I don't disagree. I think they should have absolutely, kind of one of the fourth down plays where Dobbins easily got the first down. That should have been the touchdown call. We could be having a very different conversation with the Bengals being knocked out of the playoffs right now. But hey, they made the plays they needed to play, particularly hanging that hat on that defense. And they sneak out of here with a win. Now they get a date with Buffalo. That'll be a big, big game next weekend.
Yeah, no doubt. I think Dobbins is an emerging player for the Ravens. I think he's going to be a bell cow type running back if he could ever find a way to stay healthy. He's had a lot of injuries early in his career. But yeah, I was with you. Interesting comments, very pointed. It kind of makes you question the coach who's been around a lot longer than he has and, has a lot of respect within that organization. But I've said on a podcast in the past, I wondered if it was kind of running its course with John Harbaugh as the coach of the Ravens.
You've said that.
Yeah, so I don't know if they make a change. It probably is more likely that they don't. But you're not going to fire a coach that consistently gets to the playoffs, has a very good coaching record overall, has won a lot of games on the road in the playoffs. It's had a very good resume, but recent years it does feel like there has been a little bit of a fall off overall.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting offseason for the Ravens. It's going to be a big one, a kind of franchise pivoting one as well. Bri, before we get out of here, let's preview really quick the Monday night game, the last game of Super Wildcard Weekend. That is the Cowboys going down to Tampa. Really a story of two teams that are more similar than you think. The Cowboys are a very talented team that has had a dud last performance that we talked about last podcast against the Washington Commanders, as bad as you can play. They have some injuries coming into here, but overall, they should easily win this game. And then you have Tampa Bay, 8-9 division winner in the terrible NFC South. Brady, the first time in his career that he's under 500. I know he only played half of that game there against the Falcons to end the season, but still, you have these two teams with this Tampa Bay offense, besides the second half against Carolina a couple weeks ago, about 2-3 weeks ago, has looked dead in the water all season. Remember, way back when, it feels like a lifetime ago, to open the season, these Bucks beat the Cowboys 19-3. Bri, I got to ask you before we get out of here, do you expect more of the same here, where the Bucks are going to get this victory at home? Or are the Cowboys, when they should be winning, are they going to win and move on with this team?
I'm going to ask you before I make my pick, who do you think I'm picking in this game?
Who do I think you're picking?
Yeah.
I think you're going to take Tom Brady.
You're right. I actually thought you were going to think I was taking Dallas, and it's weird because I've been down on the Bucks all season, as I think a lot of people have, and there have been more weeks than not where we've talked up the Cowboys because they at times look like they're one of the better teams in the league. But again, with the Cowboys, it just feels like it's the same story. And the Week 18 game, and I know you could say it was largely a meaningless game, but I'm worried about the way the offense played. I'm worried about the way the quarterback played in Dak Prescott. And I have felt like it was going to be the offense that holds this team back. And I just feel like this is a really bad matchup. We saw
Yeah.
what happened in week one, and the Bucks started to get a little more cohesiveness on the offensive side. Brady making the connection with Mike Evans that had been lost for most of the year, had that huge game with the 3 touchdowns and the huge receiving total. And let's face it, it's Brady in the playoffs. And as much as many people don't, want to see him do well,
He
oftentimes
does.
he does. So I really have a feeling it's going to be another disappointing night for the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cowboy fans are going to be questioning where do we go from here with the quarterback, with the head coach, with Jerry Jones. I mean, all aspects of this team that get called into question after yet another disappointing finish.
Oh yeah.
I think we're headed for another one.
Bry, I'm going to agree with you. I'm taking the Tampa Bay Bucks here as well. Dallas should easily win this game. If they win this game, am I surprised? No. But there's just something about the way they've played, especially since Dak Prescott has come back from injury. He's had picks almost every single game. He's had multiple interception games, I believe 4 of them. He's had 3 games of a pick 6, which included last week as well.
Yeah.
He has not played well. And the one thing that Tampa Bay can do, even though they don't do it as well as they've done in past years, but they still do it decent enough, is they have a run defense. And if the Cowboys cannot run the ball here with Elliott and Pollard, they're in trouble, because I think putting it on the shoulders of Dak Prescott is not the way to go. And you know what? Tom Brady, this offense, they've not figured it out all season. I believe Brady's out the door. I believe he's done with Tampa Bay. That's it. He's a free agent. Don't think he's coming back. But for a final ride, at least for this one playoff game, I think this is a bad matchup, as you said. Just like I thought the Vikings were a bad matchup for the Giants, the Giants were a bad matchup for the Vikings, I think that Tampa Bay is a bad matchup for the Cowboys there. I think it's just a team that you do not want to see, and I think the Bucs are going to pull this one out. And there's going to be, are we going to question if McCarthy's gone? Probably not, because Jerry Jones has basically already said that win or lose, McCarthy's coming back next year. So I don't think he has anything to worry. I don't think there's any pressure going on there. I think more of the pressure is going to be on Dak Prescott and on what happens on Tuesday if they ultimately lose this game. But yeah, we'll talk more about this game next podcast, but I think the Bucs are going to pull this out. I think it's going to be a very ugly game. Is it 19-3? Probably not, but I think somewhere in that 17-14, 17-13. I think it's going to be a very ugly game, very low scoring. And we'll see a lot of probably stupid penalties committed, particularly from the Dallas Cowboys. But Brian, that's going to wrap up our podcast here, covering most of Super Wildcard Weekend, and we previewed the final game there. Thank you so much if you've listened this far. Of course, there's always timestamps down below in the description. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to skip around, we completely understand. Have us on in the background. Only want to listen to a particular game. Completely get it. We'll be back at the end of this week, and you should see going into the divisional round, there'll be another podcast kind of wrapping up that Bucs-Cowboys game and then previewing all of our division games. All our social media is down below as well, the link on. Brian, before we get out of here, any final thoughts?
I guess just real quickly, I know we're going to get into some of the coaching things in podcasts going forward, but the Jets do have a hole now at offensive coordinator after parting ways with Mike LaFleur, so going to be a new voice. I think the change was kind of inevitable considering how the offense just fell apart, and you can blame the quarterback situation all you want. The play callers certainly didn't help, so I think change was needed. I did not think there was any way they would make a change at head coach. To me, that was always way over the top, but seeing them make a change on the offensive side makes sense, and now we'll see who they look to bring in to fill that spot.
Yeah, it's a decision that we will definitely talk about more. I mean, it could be a classic case of one man's trash is another man's treasure, because the Rams are the leaded front runner rumor going on for Mike LaFleur as their new offensive coordinator, with Liam Cohen going back to Kentucky. But guys, as I said, it's a great podcast. We had a lot of fun. A great Super Wildcard Weekend. Think we'll have another great game tonight to kind of wrap this up, and then some great matchups here in the divisional round. We're eating as NFL fans right now. We are really enjoying ourselves. There's a lot of great matchups, a lot of great teams that are really going on, and some great quarterback play as well. Like the video, subscribe channel, share with your friends if you be so kind, and until next 1st and 10 episode, thanks for watching.